I didn't understand at the beginning the symbolism of the sunrise. I was just shooting those because they're pretty and because that's the time that I had. But I've come to realize very clearly that the sunrise is a symbol of new beginning. It's a symbolizer of a second chance, a chance to start over. Um, it represents warmth, it represents strength, it represents light, and it's a constant.
Hi, it's Steph, and that was the voice of journalist and photographer Mark Potter. I had the good fortune of getting to work with Mark for years in my career as a network news producer. Based in Miami at that time, Mark and I covered a range of stories together, from early Mexican drug cartel coverage to opioid abuse to lighter stories like LED lighting and alligators and crocodiles. And a sweet school steel drum band story remains a favorite of mine to this day. Mark is the type of person who, when he comes in the morning and leaves the office at the end of the night, he says good morning, and he says good night, and he says please, and he says thank you. And in my book, that is the kind of stuff that really, really matters. The number one word that comes to mind when I think of Mark and his career is integrity. So I'm privileged to have him as a guest on the podcast today. Mark will share insights on a range of topics, including the stories he covered in his 41-year career, what the lifestyle is really like for journalists and their families, what the draw is and what the drawbacks are to that life. We talk a little bit of music, we talk a little Orange Blossom Special, and then we pivot to life after news for Mark and how he may have encountered his largest obstacle yet at that time. And he gives some really beautiful insights on how he made it through that time, which I hope you may find applicable to your own life as well. His involved the help of a camera and a rising sun. I promise you'll want to hear his interpretation of it all at the very end of the interview. And if you do listen to the very end, I'm also going to share an example of another door opening from my own life. So if that interests you in the least, please stick around. This is the Another Door Opens podcast, and I am your host, Stephanie Hamango. Here is Mark Potter. I just want to start talking about your journalism career. It spanned more than 40 years, and much of that time was spent in investigative units, and you reported from all over the U.S., South and Central America, UK, China, Philippines, Mexico, and more. Can you just give me a brief list of the diversity of stories you covered as a broadcast journalist during those 40 years?
Well, they said there are only 300 stories in the world, and I've done them several times over. But I have covered a variety of stories. I seem to gravitate toward the investigative stories, the hard news stories, but I've also done a lot of features too. In the hard news realm, and being based in Miami, that's not a hard thing to get involved with. I did a lot of work on the drug war, the Colombian drug war, later the Mexican drug war, the whole fight over the what was going on in the U.S. border. A lot of work in Cuba on the situation there and people pouring out of there. Disturbances in South America, a lot of natural disasters, the Israel-Hezbollah war, many stories throughout the United States, including following up on a lot of civil rights cases that were sort of half finished in the 1960s, and then we revisited them many years later. Just a wide range of stories. And again, in Miami, you just can't help but run into really dramatic ones. Just in 1 year, 40 years ago in 1980, we had the Mariel boat lift here. We had the cocaine cowboy war. We had the Haitian Exodus, and a race ride, the McDuffie race ride, in which 18 people were killed in one night. So those are some of the things I've done. Plus, I did a story on the man who wrote the Orange Blossom Special, the country anthem. So it covers a pretty wide swath. 41 years in this business, you get to do a lot of things.
Tell me about the Orange Blossom Special just briefly.
The Orange Blossom Special was written by a guy named Irvin T. Rouse, who lived later in an old shack in the Florida Everglades, and he wrote. It's about a train coming from New York to Florida. He wrote it in a car. He'd only been on a train one time, but it became a really well-known song. Johnny Cash recorded it, the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, and when we found him in the Everglades on a dirt road, he was not able to play the fiddle anymore, but he could recite the words and tell great stories. And we noted that the place where he lived was lined with all the album covers. That was his wallpaper, the album covers of all the people who had recorded his song. And he was a big name in country music, and that really was, for a long time, considered the anthem of country music. And there he was, yeah, he had a shack in the Florida Everglades.
Do you think your love of music, which, by the way, great finger picking guitar, all kinds of music.
Mhm.
I know the lyrics thing is something that you say you can't remember lyrics, but as
No,
far
I
as
can't.
storytelling, do you think part of the draw of music for you is the storytelling? Because you are a born
Absolutely.
storyteller.
Yes. Yeah, well, thank you. The definition of a country song: three chords and the truth. and, and yeah, country music is great, and I like all kinds of music. And I'm devastated by the recent death from COVID of John Prine, who was one of the best storytellers ever. And I loved his music. I loved his lyrics, and started really listening to lyrics carefully. I could never remember them, but I liked them. Gordon Lightfoot, who so many other people, even from Bob Dylan to Bruce Springsteen, have said that they admired. I loved really well written songs, and I tried to the degree that I could to mirror what they did in the writing that I sometimes did. I was able to marry music and the TV pieces that I did, and I think a lot of good writers. I would suspect Charles Perrault, who was one of my heroes, did that too.
And coming back to news a little bit, I know that each of the stories and the physical situations you ended up in demanded something very different of you, something nuanced for each story. But at the same time, I think your integrity bound approach to journalism tells me that there was something similar required in every situation. Did you have sort of a set of guides or value based signposts that led you in your reporting of everything you did?
I mean, the absolutely, and the most important mantra was get it right.
Hmm.
Don't get it first necessarily. Get it right. And I always wanted, to the degree that I could, to generate my own work. Um, the one of the strongest mantras that I had, and it went all through my career, and even in the photography that I do now as a hobby, is to get as close to the original source of a story as you can. And I'll give you an example of that. In Miami in 79, 80, 81, 82, we had a horrific war going on in the streets of Miami. It was the cocaine war. The infamous cocaine cowboys were shooting each other, and in a mall on the highway, and six people killed in a home. All kinds of violence occurring in Miami. It was really horrific, and of course, all the reporters in town were covering that. I felt that we needed to go one step further. We needed to find out the original source of this violence, and that was in Medellin, Colombia. So another guy named Tony Zimbato and Hector Vasquez, a sound man, took off. And this was in local news. I didn't work for the network then. We took off for Medellin, Colombia, and we went to Bogota, Medellin, Villavicencio, and Santa Marta, and spent time in Colombia finding out where all this violence, this drug-related violence, was coming from. And what we found was just stunning. The violence, as bad as it was in Miami, paled in comparison to what was going on in Colombia, and that was coming our way. So we brought that information back to Miami and put it on the air, and that really helped wake the town up to what was going on. The numbers of viewers in the town on that station during that time skyrocketed, which is another thing that I believe, that if you have good content, people will come and they'll watch it. Uh, and So that I had that as a mantra, but the main one was to uh, get it right, get in depth, get as far into the story as you can, and make sure that you have your facts right. And I will say this right now, very proudly, in my 41 years, Steph, I never faked anything, ever, never. And if I had, I'd been fired. If I had, I would have been disgraced in the industry. And when I hear that being said today, as really somebody saying, "I don't like what you're reporting," that makes my blood boil, because it's an attack on journalists in general, most of whom are really working hard to try to get the story right, and they're getting attacked by people who don't even know what those words mean, and they don't know what goes into the reporting. And so I think it's got to be fact based, and it's got, to my way of thinking, it needs to be as in depth as it can be. And I don't see as much of that going on now as there used to be when I was in the business.
Because you got so close to so many different, really extreme situations, and that were so varied, how did you learn to cope with or carry the things that you witnessed, the pain and suffering of so many other people?
Well, you don't want to lose your compassion, and sometimes you just don't do very well with it. Sometimes you see things that just tear you up, but you cannot. If you lose yourself, if you become so emotional that you can't work, then you're out of business, and you have to get through that. And it's the same with police officers and so many other people who work in trying situations. I found that I would compartmentalize when I was on the story, and sometimes it would be after it was over that I would start to feel it. That happened a number of times. Um, I found that in dicey situations, and of which there were many down here, I would get steely, just focused, really focused. And I don't want anybody ever to think that I and others who did this kind of work were not afraid. I was terrified sometimes. I was really afraid, but or at least I had a low sense of alert and nervousness. But sometimes that makes you better. The more alert you are, the better you are. You just don't want to be consumed by it. So you kind of have to step on that stuff and step on the emotions to the degree that you can. I'm not sure that's a particularly healthy thing to do in the long term, but you kind of have to do that in order to do the work. And I did it. And but sometimes you'd see things that would just, be too much. One quick example is that when I worked at ABC News, I did a lot of reporting on the drug trade, the smugglers. And that was a lot easier than the assignment that I got one time when they had a program called American Agenda, where I was suddenly assigned to cover the users. That one got me, because I then ended up in covering the smugglers was like cowboys, cowboy movies. You're chasing the bad guys, and there's a certain, I hate to say it, but there's a certain excitement about that. Covering the users was a whole different ballgame. Ending up in emergency rooms, crack houses, seeing the devastating effect of these drugs, and witnessing the effects on families and kids who had to be protected from their parents who were in building meth labs. I saw all that stuff. That one got me. And toward the end of that assignment, I asked to get off it, because it was just too devastating. It was just having to watch that all the time. I needed to get out and do other things.
That brings me to the thought of the cumulative effect and the long-term effect. I think when people don't know about the life of a network journalist like yourself, they don't understand that it's an all the time, 24 hours, 7 days a week job. Like, you were on call for about 40 years, and I'm just I'm just curious, how did you
And sometimes,
do
Steph, I would call you to go with me
That's true.
at 2:00 in the morning. Hey, Steph, guess what?
It is true.
Yes.
How just describe that life a little bit for people who are not familiar with it. Like, what is the lifestyle of somebody who is a network correspondent and literally always on call?
There were some negatives involved in that coverage. It's very hard on your family. It's kind of like being in the military, and you know how hard that can be on families. It can be as hard on families as being a first responder is, being a police officer. They take a lot of the brunt of it. for the person actually doing the job, it's physically demanding. But I'd be lying if I didn't say that it's also really, really exciting. It's takes you around the world. It puts you into places you would have never thought you would be. But I did notice that as I got older and got into my 60s, it was getting harder to do just physically. Because when you retire from this job, it's not like we're retiring from an office job, from an accounting job. You're retiring from combat in some ways. You're always running the airport. You're heading out under deadlines. Sometimes you're going to unpleasant places to cover unpleasant stories. And the 24-hour news cycle requires you to be up a lot longer than normal people and to sleep a lot less. And one example that I give to people is to explain it, and this was near the end of my career, was that when El Chapo, the Mexican trafficker, escaped from his prison in a maximum security prison outside Mexico City through a tunnel, I was there for 5 days and 4 nights, round the clock, at altitude, in the cold. It was cartel-dominated territory, so there was a lot of tension. And in those 4 nights, I had a total, and I'm not talking about per night, a total in 4 days of 5 hours of sleep. 1 hour here, 2 hours there, 1 hour. And by the end of that, I was the walking lunatic. I really was.
And you were reporting during that time?
Reporting on the Today Show, Nightly News, MSNBC, and on the website, all 4. Communications weren't good. I had to walk down a road 100 feet, 200 feet to get a phone call in. And one of our photo crews was attacked by some gunmen on motorcycles, and we were in that sort of environment. And it was really tough, and the lack of sleep, not enough food, the whole thing was just very wearing. So sometimes it can be really tough. However, there are compensations. When the Miami Marlins won the World Series, my assignment was to sit in the box right above home plate and watch the game. And because ABC had the game, and NBC was a guest, I was prohibited from doing any work. So I sat through 2 games behind home plate, eating hot dogs and drinking Cokes on the company dime. So that wasn't so bad. So there's a mix. There's a mix.
Definitely a mix. Yeah, there definitely are perks. And that's one thing I recall is, as much as there are really, really tough things that you almost have to digest after the fact, there were always things that felt like a thrill, a front row seat, to life.
Well, exactly. You're watching. You're writing the first draft of history, as they say, and you're experiencing these things. I remember one of the things that just struck me. I was sent to Israel to cover the Israel-Hezbollah war, and
weren't you in Haifa?
I was in Haifa, and then I went over to Metula.
Mm-hmm.
And while in Metula, which is right on the border, we had a little hotel, which is, you could see the fence. I mean, it was like 100 yards away from us. There was a rocket that came in from Hezbollah, and it landed in Nazareth, and it killed 2 children, Arab children, ironically. And I remember going to Nazareth, and there was a funeral service that night. We couldn't get in, and in the dark of night, I find myself walking down the streets of Nazareth. This kid, born in a small town in Missouri, raised in Ann Arbor, Michigan, went to a Baptist church. I'm walking in the streets of Nazareth, and I remember the stories, and I'm thinking, wow, this is really happening. Meeting the Pope, we're working around the Pope, meeting Fidel Castro, being in a prison with Manuel Noriega. Sometimes you think yourself and think, how does this happen? And that's what that's the draw of the job. It's the experiences that you have. And they don't all have to be famous people. Sometimes you just meet incredible people. The first black mayor of Philadelphia, Mississippi. That town was the scene of the Mississippi burning incident, where 3 civil rights workers were murdered in the mid-'60s by Klansmen and police. And now they have a black mayor, and we went there and we met him, and he's a remarkable guy. We had that opportunity to get to know this man, and that is stunning.
A quick moment here to let you know a little more. The mayor's name is James A. Young, and he was named mayor of Philadelphia, Mississippi in May of 2009 and is still the mayor there today in 2020.
If you have any interest in life and the world, the opportunities are off the chart sometimes.
You have been at this for so long, and I'm always curious about the path people take. Were you as confident in your reporting skills in the beginning as you have become throughout the years? And how did you learn throughout the years?
I think that in the beginning, I may have been a little too confident coming out of journalism school. I thought I didn't know anything. I was eager, and I learned quickly that I had a lot to learn. And no, I was not nearly as good in the beginning as I became, but I had a real opportunity early on, which was stunning. In that 14 months into my career, I moved from Evansville, Indiana to Miami, Florida, which was one of the best news towns in the country and one of the best investigative towns. And I came into that environment in 1976. And I looked around at these big names in investigative work. Brian Ross was there, Fred Francis, John Camp, Carmel Cafaro, Clarence Jones, and I got to work with these people and later compete with them and to work in their milieu. That was incredible training to learn how they did things and how they protected sources and developed sources and how they got their facts right. And I had that environment. I had a very conservative and hard driving news director at the NBC affiliate who I learned a lot from. And then when I went to the ABC affiliate in 81 to 83, I worked on an I team where I was given 2 months on each project. And we did stories on immigrant smuggling. We did the Colombian drug wars. We went to Colombia to find out what was going on there, arms trafficking. And we went to a little town in Florida where they were smuggling tons of marijuana out of this town that had 500 people in it. And we lived with them for a couple of months, and then we blew up that situation. And it was just over time, I learned a lot more, and I did become more confident. And so when I ended my career at NBC, I thought that by then I was at my prime, and I had time there, and you were there too. From about 2000, I would say 8 to 2014, where everything was clicking. We had a team in Miami that was outstanding. We had, including photographers, producers, and correspondents. And then we had a front office that supported us. We had a show, NBC Nightly News, that supported us, an anchorman who supported us. I mean, that was a really great time. And one of the two heights of my career. The other one was when I was at the ABC affiliate in Miami working on that investigative team. Those two periods in my career, I thought that I was at my prime. And the latter one at NBC was, it felt like the culmination of 40 years. And I felt a lot more comfortable about what I was doing that. But then the business, unfortunately, started to change. And the kind of reporting that I was doing fell out of favor. And I miss those days. And I don't know if they're going to return.
As technology advanced and everybody graduated from pagers to multiple cell phones and Blackberries and iPhones, I remember we even talked about it back then about how the story and the reporting what was most important. But one thing that I think endeared you to everybody is you kept one item very much on the analog side. Can you tell us about your little black book?
Yeah, it was more a big black book. It's a it's a book. It's a source book. It's a telephone book. It's about 4 or 5 inches thick, and it's got. I'm always having to change the cover a couple times a year because it falls apart. Sometimes it's held together with packing tape or gaffer's tape, but it's got names in there, and it's the names of people that I developed over the years as good sources. And I carried that book forever. It was like walking around with a brick. People did make fun of it, especially as people started to develop contact lists on their cell phones and all. I still had that book a lot longer than anybody else had one. But the funny thing was when their cell phones died and they lost their contact lists, they'd come crawling to me and ask very kindly if I could give them some numbers. My book never died on me. Now it was stolen. I did have it in the early '80s, the first version of it was stolen out of my car, which was parked in front of the Miami Federal Courthouse between two police cars, and still somehow got it. Somebody got in there and took my travel bag and had my book, and I was crushed. But I was able to rebuild it, and then many years were packed on top of it. But there's some interesting names in there.
I bet.
In fact, this book became somewhat famous on the college circuit because in journalism schools, because a book came out that so many professors around the country used that had a chapter, and I think it was chapter 7 on source development, that started off with the story of my source book and how I used it and how it was developed. And it got to the point where one day I went to the University of Miami. I had that book with me. I was holding it in my hand, and a professor from the journalism school came up to me and asked me what we were doing on campus. And I said we were setting up for a presidential debate. And she said, that's interesting that you're here because right now we're talking about chapter 7 and your book. And she goes, oh my, is that? And I said, yes, ma'am, that's the book. And she goes, can I look? Yes, ma'am, you can look at it. She was going through it was like, oh my God, it was amazing.
That's very cool. I love that your journalism career continues to follow you even after,
Yeah.
So
well, I think that my journalism kind of still defines the way I live today in my hobby of photography.
absolutely. And I wanted to make that turn there is
Yeah.
after so much adventure and adrenaline, for 40 years, just tell me what you thought retirement would look like to you and then how it ended up being something you would never wish on anybody.
Right. Well, I always, first of all, my retirement came earlier than I thought it would, a few years earlier. We don't necessarily need to go into that, but that happens to a lot of people in our business. They sort of age out, and that it happened to me, and so I left a little earlier than I wanted to. Although, as it turned out, it was the right time. I thought that I would be very active, that I would maybe do some long form work for maybe PBS or working for. I'd like to teach. I've done that a lot as a guest lecturer, so I thought maybe I would start a teaching career. Unfortunately, however,
I just need to jump in here for a moment for clarity to tell you that Mark is about to talk about his wife, Judith. There is an audio hit on the recording, and I did not want to ask Mark to repeat this.
1 month after my going away party in 2016, in the spring of 2016 in Miami, my wife and I received catastrophic news that she had high stage ovarian cancer. And that was just devastating. Just devastating. I'll never forget driving home in the car, and she turned to me and says, I've just been given a death sentence, haven't I? And it was absolutely shocking. But I went to work again. I guess I drew on what always propelled me in news was there's something in there that just says you got to go forward.
Mm-hmm.
And immediately I went to work and started calling people and calling sources. Source development was always my calling card in news. So some of those sources got a call from me saying, where do we go? What hospital? What doctor? And we got that going pretty quickly. And that started a 3-year battle that Judith and I had together fighting this cancer. And unfortunately, we lost the fight in April of 2019, a year ago. And no, that's not something I would wish on anybody. And so I had no retirement. And I went right from hard driving news into, hard driving cancer care. And that was a complete change. No more talk of the universities, no more talk of long form, no more journalism, no nothing. In fact, I kind of went out of touch with everybody for a long time while I was involved in that. And that was a completely different ballgame.
There was one thing that developed during that time that ended up being a bit of a lifeline and perhaps continues to be for you. Can you talk about the importance of photography and how that became folded into your routine each day?
Yeah. When I first retired, before we knew the problems that would lie ahead, I bought a good camera. The guys at NBC, the photographers there recommended that I get this really good Canon camera that they said, you're not smart enough for this camera, but buy it anyway. You'll learn it. It's only they could say it. And I did it. And I started going out. I started shooting sunrises, and because that was just something to do. I shot other things, but that was included near my house. I even started posting some on Facebook. But then when the cancer notification came and I started getting into that, I completely stopped everything. I had my own struggles at that time. As strong as I was chasing Narcos, this cancer thing and the prospect of losing her was just so much. And I had my own issues of despair, depression, anger, anxiety. And I just went dark. I quit Facebook. I quit photos. I quit fishing. I was a big fly fisherman. I stopped all that. And I had friends who had no idea what happened to me because I just, kind of went into this situation with her. Finally, Judith, who was really just so lovely and so smart, looked at me one day and said, you got to get out of that rut. You got to get out of the house. You got to start doing something. And she kind of made an ultimatum, said you either need to start shooting photos or go back to your fishing. You got to do something. And so I listened to it very carefully, and I chose the photography because I could do it near the house. There's a park near our house, 5, 6 minutes, 7 minutes away, where it's on the edge of Biscayne Bay looking east. So I get the sunrise every day. And I started going back out there. I started a pattern where I get up at 5 in the morning. I'd check on her, and then I would slip out of the house. I didn't say sneak out of the house because she knew I was doing it. In fact, she was making me do it. And then I went down to the park and I started shooting sunrises. And then I started posting them on Facebook, and later started an Instagram account. And it was interesting because it was basically just for me to kind of get my head back on straight. But other people started reacting, and they said they liked them. I'm like, really? And they started saying they look forward to them. And then pretty soon, some of my friends started making fun of me a little bit. Say, wait, I wouldn't understand this. You're a retiree. Why are you shooting sunrises when you could sleep in late and then go shoot sunsets? I mean, what's the matter with you? They were well-meaning, but I could never say why sunrises. And the answer was, that's the only time I had, because I couldn't tell them because my wife was very private, and that's the one thing she didn't want me doing, was saying anything publicly about her situation, and I honored that. So I could never tell them why sunrises. That's the only time I had, because when I would come home, I'd publish a picture, post a picture, and then I would go into 14 hours of cancer care, from 8 to 10 at night. That's when her last pills had to be taken, and I handled all that. And later, as we got into hospice, it was a 24/7 thing. But I continued to shoot the pictures. And then when she passed away in April of last year, I then made a tribute on Facebook, and I explained why sunrises. And at that point, then they started to have extra meaning for other people. And you could hear people slapping their foreheads on my Facebook page, and then they got it. And then something happened. They just took off. Everybody started wanting these photos now. And it was really a neat thing. It was symbiotic. They wanted the photos because they said they made them feel good, especially those up north, as I'm showing all these great tropical photos to them in the wintertime. But they inspired me. And that gave me purpose. And that's really important. I heard Vice President Biden the other day talking about, and there's a man who knows tragedy in his life. And he was telling someone recently that you have to have some kind of purpose to get through times like this. And I'm serious. That's true. Yeah, you do. And I had purpose, and I also had support. I used to laugh at Facebook a little bit when I was a network journalist. I thought, it's stupid. Everybody's self-involved, posting pictures of what they had for lunch and But I'm ashamed of that now, because I will say that for me, it was a lifesaver. The connections that I reestablished, going all the way back to first grade. My high school class from Ann Arbor, Michigan, the class of 71, they rose up, and they're on there all the time. My college class, people in the news business, all the places that I worked. have all been on my page, and a couple of famous photographers have gotten on there, and it reestablished for me connections with people, and that solved the other problem that I had, which is that I had isolated. And if I were to talk to anybody about what to do, and if you have a situation like mine, don't do what I do. Do not isolate. Don't isolate. You have to take care of yourself. You got to go out and do things, and you have to get engaged to some activity. You have to be engaged in some activity, and you have to have a purpose. If you do those things, you'll have a better chance of getting through it. And I learned it the hard way, especially about the isolation. But I got past that, and I'm still out there doing this every day. I was out shooting today, and I posted 2 pictures, and I hear from people all the time, and so it's been life saving for me too.
There's something so symbolic in the
Yeah.
sunrise. And
Yep.
and like you said, when people hear the story behind why you were shooting sunrises, I think it gives people hope and it gives people perspective in their own lives, whatever their dark period might be,
Right.
to remember that there's a sunrise tomorrow.
I think that's right. And this is what people tell me, and they do it a lot. And sometimes if I don't post, phone calls go, "Hey, what's the matter with him? Okay, how come he's not putting a photo out today?" It's
How
become
dare
a
you go out of
job.
town and not see that
Yeah.
sunrise?
Well, if I go out of town, I post one out there. It's kind of interesting. The sunrise itself is. I didn't understand at the beginning the symbolism of the sunrise. I was just shooting those because they're pretty and because that's the time that I had. But I've come to realize very clearly that the sunrise is a symbol of new beginning. It's a symbolize of a second chance, a chance to start over. Um, it represents warmth. It represents strength. It represents light, and it's a constant. And no matter what problem you have, the sun's still going to come up. It might be behind the clouds, but you'll know it's up, and that's instructive too. And I've had a lot of people tell me that they look forward to these things and they help calm them too. So that gives me incentive to go back out there every day, and I do. And the nice thing is that it is like a job. You have to be. It's like broadcast news. 6 o'clock is 6 o'clock. That doesn't mean 6:01. I mean that broadcast at 6. Well, the sun comes up at exactly this time, and if you're not there, you miss it. You got to be there. So there are some similarities. The difference is in the news business, there is a lot of stress, and there is a lot of second guessing, and there's a lot of silliness, a lot of politics. In this, it's pure. There's no stress. If I miss the Pelican today, only I know. I'm not going to admit it. But being a former investigative reporter, I remember where that Pelican was. I'll get him tomorrow. But it's under no pressure. It's kind of a self-generated hunt. In fact, one of the things that I say a little too often, but I'll risk it again one more time, is that I have now traded in chasing narcos for pelicans. It requires the same skill set.
Explain that.
Well, to catch El Narco and catch El Pelicano, it's the same thing. It's preparation, positioning, and patience. And then I ruined that story to say, and those are the 3 P's of Potter's principles. And everybody goes, "Will you shut up with that?" But it's true. It's true. It's it's the hunt. My life goal, for example, right now is to photograph a Florida panther in the wild. Now that's kind of an interesting thing to try to do. I know people who have done it. I haven't yet, but I want to do that. That's like being a reporter. So I don't miss. There are some parts of the news business I do miss, the logistics and using my brain to figure out how to go into certain places and get back out. Nobody gets hurt and all that. I miss that part, but I can kind of satisfy that need through the photography by chasing the light, by chasing wildlife, and nobody gets hurt. Nobody gets, we hopefully at the end we get a nice picture out of it.
And where can people see these pictures? Where can people watch for them online? How can they follow you on Instagram?
Well, my Instagram is It's pretty clever. I don't know how I came up with this. Mark Potter, Miami. Pretty good, eh? It's Mark with a K. Mark Potter, Miami. And I'm on Facebook, Mark Potter. I think if people put in Mark Potter and then NBC, I don't work there now, but that'll put them over to me because that's listed as my last place of employment.
Mm-hmm.
And they can see my stuff, that I do every day. There are also a couple of other venues. I was really proud of this. 25 of my photos ended up on the fourth floor of the Lennar Foundation Medical Center at the University of Miami campus. That's the cancer floor. And that's where Judith was treated. And I donated 25 of my photos to the floor, to the nurses. And I always wanted to do that. I'm getting a little emotional about it because that was my goal last year, to get that done. And that took an act of Congress to get it done, but we did.
You did, and it meant so much. You posted some things about that at the time. Share with me a little bit the reaction from some of the nurses.
Oh, they were well, Judith and I were very, very grateful to how well they treated us. The nurses, the staffers, office people, the doctors. I'm not leaving anybody out of the whole medical team. But it was, largely the nurses who dealt with us at that facility where she got her chemotherapy. And they seemed to be very grateful. I've heard from them since. I've heard from some patients, caregivers, and that was very rewarding to me. They paid for the framing and the printing. I donated the photos, copyright free. No, use them any way you want. And there are 25 of them. They're 3 feet by 4 feet wide. Most of them are 3 feet wide. And they line the hallways. So when you walk into the chemotherapy unit for your first time and probably are going to be nervous, you've got these beautiful, pictures of the sunrise on either side of you as you walk down that hall. The hospital itself did a really good job of placing the photos. I didn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
They decided which ones went there, and boy, did they do a good job. And then they also lined the walls going into the exam rooms, and where you go to meet your doctor and hear what he or she has to say. And we know how tough that waiting period can be. That's really a high anxiety time. And so I just thought that it was whatever I could do to help caregivers and patients see something nice, maybe a reminder of what's out there as they're standing in these hallways, to support the nurses. I can't imagine, the pressures that they're under and the things that they have to deal with, the doctors, the staffers. And so that meant a lot to me to be able to do that. And the outpouring of support for that from my friends too was really high, and that meant a lot to me. I've also donated some to some charities for auctions and things like that. And I guess my goal for this year is to figure out a way to make the photos available to people, maybe to do a book. I might call it something like Sunrise for Judith, a picture book. I'm in that process. I've had my first rejection from a major publisher in New York, so I guess I'm on my way to success because all my great literary heroes went through the same things.
Yes, every no is one step closer to that. Yes.
You know more about that world than I do. I don't know anything about it, but it's.
I don't either. I self-published, so I don't know how that works. No. Just one final thought. What do the words "another door opens" mean to you?
Oh, it means that if a door closes on you, no matter how devastating it is, all is not lost. And so there's other opportunities. I never, never, never thought that leaving news, I would go through this cancer battle. And that was not a positive. That was obviously a negative, but there were a lot of positives in it. And it brought my wife and I so much closer together. She's a wonderful, you knew her. She was a wonderful lady, incredibly strong. She, in 1981, she came to this country in 1970 by herself from Cuba, and then went back in 1980 on a boat to get the rest of her family out during that famous boat lift. And then she worked at ABC News and later got 2 more college degrees and became a teacher of learning disabled preschool children. A lot of that was going on while I was on the road. And I had coming home and being with her for that 3 years brought us so much closer. So there was that's one positive side of that whole thing that I will never forget. And I was really proud of the work that my brother-in-law, Isaac Rodriguez, and I did toward the latter part of her life as we took over the hospice care with the help of a doctor and some nurses. But we ran it 24/7, and so even that was an opening, to a greater connection to this just lovely, lovely lady who I was married to for 24 years. I knew for more than 30 years. And then after that, then the photography took off and became my, in quotes, new job. And then some of my photos ended up in a gallery, and then now some are in the hospital, and they're spreading out, and different people are asking for them, and I'm very happy to give them. My real goal every time I'm out there, I'm when I'm shooting, I'm thinking about cancer patients. I'm thinking about caregivers. I really am. And even even those nasty looking pelicans, because sometimes they can be elegant, and that's who I'm thinking about, and that's who they're going to. So it's a whole different mission. And I barely, and I'm getting all this adulation. I think you're going to laugh when I say this. I'm getting all this adulation. I don't know how to act. I never got any love when I was a reporter, ever. you know,
Just receive it.
I like to think I got some respect, earned it over time, but I never got any love. I'm getting all this love from people, and it's really not bad. I should have done this earlier. I understand Sally feels when she stood up at the Academy Awards and said, "You really like me." I get that. People laugh about that. I don't laugh at her. I understand that 100%.
Absolutely. And if we're going to be honest, everybody would love to feel that way.
Yeah, I think so. So I do have a purpose, and it's just kind of come around to where it's working. Do I feel sad? Yes. It's been a year since her death, but some days it feels like it was yesterday. And it hits hard. I look around the house and I see something, it's like bam, and it does not go away. But I don't know that I want it to go away. That's just part of it. And the photography is not an attempt to mask that. It's just an attempt to deal with that and to keep going and to have, again, purpose and to not be isolated. I've met a lot of people in the photography field who were out there shooting the sunrises just like I am. So met a whole new group of people, and so I thought it was real darkness ahead, and it turned out not to be. And I think there's probably a lesson in that for other people.
Remember, the idea behind this Another Door Opens podcast is to open doors, open hearts, and open minds. Everyone has a story to share and lessons that we can learn from them. Every week, you'll meet someone new and interesting here to download some of their life insights. I mean, why not? Also, please continue to download the podcast, share it with friends, and hop onto iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts and subscribe to it. If you've enjoyed it, please take a few minutes to give it a 5-star review and share it with your friends. You can follow the Another Door Opens podcast online at podcastado on Instagram and Twitter. That's at podcastado. Before I share my story of another door opening today, I want to thank Eric Brown, who made those funky beats in Los Angeles. And thank you to Jonathan Raz, who edited the podcast from Berlin. And to my guest, Mark Potter, thank you for so generously sharing your journey with us and allowing us to see so much more in the blessing of a sunrise. Okay, I told you guys that at the end of each episode, I'd share a story of another door opening in my own life. Today, I want to share a story from my sophomore year of high school in Two Harbors, Minnesota. It was an early morning in autumn, and we had a swimming and diving practice before school that day. I was a diver. Even though I could do fairly high degree of difficulty dives in the front, back, and inward categories, I was terrified to do anything in the reverse category. and that was required to advance in the bigger meets. Reverse meaning going off the board forward and then reversing mid-dive backward toward the board. And just for context, it was a 1 meter springboard, so not high at all. I had the biggest mental block about doing this particular dive, and I had had it with myself. I knew I could do it physically, but I was inexplicably terrified. But I was going to do that dive that day. I'd made up my mind. I didn't care if I landed in the shallow end. I didn't care if it wasn't pretty. I was going to do it. And I did it. I did a reverse dive with frogged, bent legs and made a gigantic splash, which is not the point, by the way, in diving. And I was ecstatic. My coach Melanie was too. So I did another and another. And with each one, I was a little closer to the board and maybe had a slightly straighter leg. Okay, next, do a reverse somersault. I did it. Okay, next, do a reverse 1.5 somersault. I threw it and I got lost in my rotation. And because I didn't know where the water was, I opened weak, not strong, while still in a semi-tucked position. And my upper back hit the top of the water, and my knees kept coming around, and the next thing I knew, my coach was in the water with me and pulling me out. And I think there was blood. And my knee had landed in my eye socket and broken my nose. And good, too. So where is the dang door here, you might be asking? Okay, after I had surgery on my nose a couple weeks later, and then had the miles of gauze unceremoniously removed on my 16th birthday, I was not able to compete for the remainder of the season. So I started writing articles for the local paper about the swimming and diving meets. And I didn't know it at the time, but with that, my journalism career began. I used the thesaurus a lot, and I'm pretty sure I used top flight in more than one of those articles. Okay, that's the door. Hop on Instagram and tell me in the comments about a door opening for you. Thank you for being here. See you guys next time. Love you. Bye.